Well, hello everybody. It has been a hot minute since I was with you, but thank you so much for clicking on this video and coming back and joining me after my YouTube hiatus. And if you're new and this is the first time you're joining me, welcome. My name is Deborah. This is a channel in which I talk about my creative pursuits, and that might be cross stitch, it might be crochet, quilting, sewing, Legos, anything else that kind of catches my fancy along the way. And this is my first video in a couple of months. So thanks so much for coming out and taking a look at the channel. Hope that you enjoy. For today, I've got a couple of different things to show you. You might think that since I haven't filmed in a while, I would have a giant pile of things to show you. And partially, some of the things that I completed were so long ago, they're scattered throughout the house and whatnot. But also, partially, I actually haven't been doing a whole lot of hobbying over the last few months. I knew when I was taking the hiatus from my channel that I was taking a hiatus from the channel, but I fully expected to keep crafting. And that wound up kind of not being the case. Took a little bit of a break from a lot of my regular hobbies, although I did do a whole lot of reading over the last 6 months. But I figure, honestly, I figure that's perfectly okay. It is perfectly fine to take a break from things that you enjoy. It's perfectly fine to have a reset and a refresh. And sometimes that spurs our creative processes on even more, or it lets us try different things. So I think it's perfectly okay, but I do appreciate that you've come back and joined me. I do have a number of different things to show you for today. I've got some cross-stitch pieces to show you. I've got a quilt top. I have made a full quilt top to show you, a little bit of other quilty talk, and then I have some book chatter at the end of the video, so I hope that you enjoy, and I will get started in just a second. So the first thing that I want to show you is a recent cross-stitch piece that I finished and fully finished. And this is the Oktober piece by Christiane Dahlbeck. And those of you who've been with the channel for a while may remember that one of my goals for this year was to stitch up this entire series, and it normally hangs on the wall, just right back here. And so I had stitched a number of them early in the year, and then I did actually continue stitching even after I took the channel hiatus for a little while. And then as my crafting kind of plateaued or kind of cut down for a little while, I missed a few of the summer months. And so I decided when I was getting back into stitching again, I would just pick up with the current month, continue on, and then at some point I'll pick up those couple of pieces that are in the center. But just as a reminder, this is from a German designer, and so all of the months are in German. And I really love those baby boar. I think that they are just too cute. And one of the things that I really enjoy about her pieces is just how delicate it looks because of her use of full and partial stitching and the back stitching that she uses. So this was a fairly quick piece to stitch, although one of the things that's changed from the first half of the year, all of these patterns are in two separate books, which I'll show you in just a second. But in the first half of the year, only the first letter is large and the rest of the letters are much smaller. And in the second half of the year, I don't know why, all of the letters are large. So these pieces do come out slightly bigger than they do at the start of the year, but that's okay. They're still pretty quick stitches. And I have been continuing to finish them in the same way. It's slightly off center there. And they are all finished in this little tray with a piece of complementary quilting fabric and then a little piece of jute there in the center to kind of line things up. So I am really happy to have that one done. Actually, hang on, I will hang it right up. There we go. So we can have it with us for the rest of the video. Just to do a little bit of pickup, I did finish two other pieces from this series earlier in the year. So I do have April with that little bunny, and then May with those beautiful little flowers. And what I'm probably going to do is actually fully finish them today and then put them away so that they are ready for next year. Those, as you can see, had those smaller letters for the rest of the word. So definitely quicker stitches. And for anybody who is interested, these two come from the German books, A Nice Half Year, and essentially you have the first half of the year in volume 1, second half of the year in volume 2, and there are a lot of different patterns in these books, not just these months, but beautiful projects to work on. So I will put all of that information in the description box below, and my intention is to get started on my November and December pieces so that I can hopefully have those up and on display for the appropriate month for this year. But it was really good to kind of pick up those projects and work on them again, and I'll pick up those kind of sections in the middle of the year, like I said, at a later point. The next project that I have to show you is two finished pieces that are part of a series. So those of you who are returning may remember that I was working on the Early American series by Little House Needleworks, and this was something that some friends and I from the Connecticut Stitching Circle were working on to commemorate the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, which is coming up in 2026 on July 4. And so there are 9 pieces in this series. You can stitch them individually if you would like, or you can stitch them all in one, which is what I had planned to do. I did actually complete all of the blocks. And this is the major project that I was working on over the last few months as I was stitching less, but kind of doing some things. You had already seen my Abigail Adams piece completed, but in the meantime, I've also finished John Hancock and Nathan Hale. And as always, I feel like I have to congratulate myself on those buildings. You would think that the John Hancock piece, because it doesn't have fill-in except on the roof, would be much faster. It's not. It took forever. I think it's because there's just a lot of color changes in that one and a lot of small elements. But anyway, so I did get those two completed over the last couple of months. But I also was realizing that I just was really not enjoying this piece. And it had nothing to do with the pattern. It had nothing to do with the project. I had chosen my own fabric, and I had also substituted my threads, which is what I usually do. And as I was stitching on it, I really felt like they just weren't working together. And in some cases, you didn't realize that until you got further along. So there were 2 grays that turned out to be just very, very close together. The pale yellow and the pale green really didn't stand out on this fabric. And so I was just not enjoying the process simply because of that. And I actually I woke up this morning fully intending to say, I am done. I have decided that 3 is enough for this project, and I am just going to step away just because, again, my choices for the threads and the fabric were just not working together, and so it just made the project not as enjoyable. But then I remembered that, you know, I had intended to create my own border for this project. I was going to put semi-quincentennial along the top, and then along each of the edges, I was going to add additional names for other people from the Revolutionary era who may not be as well known as some of the people who are on these blocks. And I realized this morning I can still do some of that. I can still put my big header on the top. I can still put names around the 3 blocks that I've stitched, even if it's not around 9 blocks. So having fully prepared to say, I am done, this is going back on the whip pile, and so I am planning to do that. And then that will be, I think, the end of this project for me. But I think that even though I didn't intend for these 3 blocks to be the only 3 that I stitched, they're actually pretty good sort of representative panels to have. So we've got Abigail Adams, who was, of course, married to John Adams, famously for saying, remember the ladies and other things, and so played a really integral role in the founding of the United States as a country. And so it's really good to have her representing the kind of the ladies and their perspective in this. Of course, in the center, we've got John Hancock, who was president of the Congress and the first signer of the Declaration. So I feel like that's good representative of the sort of government that was leading this effort at the time. And then Nathan Hale is, of course, Connecticut's state hero. So it's good to have that local representation. So not an intentional array, but I think it's also really good if I'm only going to have 3 blocks. So I am also going to change Abigail Adams to read 1776. In the 9 pieces, they're not just about the Declaration and its signing, it's about the Revolutionary era generally. And so a number of the blocks have other dates on them. But I figured, considering that both of the other 2 blocks did wind up with 1776, and I'm stitching this as a commemoration, I'm just going to change hers so that they all say 1776. She was still there, she was still acting. It'll be fine. So that is my early Americans piece that I have also been working on. So much for it being an FO. The other bit of kind of cross-stitch content that I have is just to say that I was recently attending the Stitch New England, look, thread on my shirt. I recently attended the Stitch New England retreat, which is run by Pam, who runs the Stitch New England shop, as well as her husband, Kevin, and then Tracy Baker, who is the volunteer coordinator. This is the 3rd year of the retreat. As always, it's just a fantastic experience. It's a great chance to get together with area stitchers, but also people who are coming from elsewhere in the US. And so it was good to be there, sit and stitch and do some shopping, and just remember how fun it is to be part of this cross-stitch community. So if you haven't gone and you're looking for a retreat in the early fall, check out the Stitch New England retreat for next year. It will be October 1st through 3rd of 2026. And then one of the things that I did while I was there is Rachel, who is CT Stitcher on Instagram, and I were asked to run the Smalls Exchange again this year. And one of the things that Pam did differently this year about the Smalls Exchange is something that I really liked. So there were enough people who participate that it's usually split into 2. And there are often people who really are there to actually exchange the stitching. That's what they're wanting to exchange. And then some people really love to add extra goodies into their bag. That's become kind of one of the traditions of Smalls Exchanges too. And so what Pam did is she actually split it out. So if you only wanted to exchange a stitched piece, that was in one Smalls Exchange. And if you wanted to have some extra fun stuff, you could do it in the other Smalls Exchange. And so I thought it went really well. We had a fairly even distribution of people who were participating in both. And so I really loved that. It gave people a little bit more of agency in kind of deciding how they want to participate in the Smalls Exchange. So I thought that was a good lesson, something people might be interested in for other retreats and Smalls Exchanges they may be part of in the future. The other thing about the retreat, of course, to show you was there was a shopping haul. There were trunk shows. I did buy some things. I'm going to highlight just 2 of them, mostly because I saw them and the models were absolutely beautiful. One of the things that we always say is, the model is what really sells it. The pictures don't always do it justice. Even when they're really good pictures, the model just really shows something off about the pieces. And these 2, I couldn't take my eyes off of. So 2 of the patterns that I bought were this one by the Artsy Housewife called Cats and Cocoa. And you may notice that there is this cat with this little coffee cup or cocoa cup tucked in his tail, and he totally looks like he's judging you so hard. And I love it. And so I wouldn't actually stitch the entire piece. You know me, I just pick the elements out that I like and I focus on those. But I would absolutely stitch that cat, maybe a little bit of the rug and some other things. But I thought that one was just too cute. And he was a very popular pattern at the retreat. The other one that I picked up was a blue flower piece. This is new, and it is called Sea and Shore, and it's got all kinds of sea animals as well as a mermaid. And again, I wouldn't stitch the entire thing, but there are definitely a lot of small elements that you could stitch and would be really enjoyable. So here in the center where we've got the sea lions and sea walrus? Am I coming up with the walrus? Anyway, that one, I think that one's a really cute little motif, and it says beach access and high tide on the signs. And so I would just stitch that as kind of a long, narrow piece. The other thing, the thing that really sold me on this and why I bought it right now is that whale. I love how you can actually see the motion of the whale as it's coming out of the water. And so that was the thing that I really loved. And what I would do, I think, is just stitch it right next to the lighthouse. Obviously the scale is going to be slightly off, but you know, you're just closer to the whale than you are to the lighthouse. So that would be a fun one. But there's several other really fun elements in there that you could stitch as smaller pieces too. So those were two of the patterns that really caught my attention and had to come home with me. So I've enjoyed kind of picking back up with my cross stitch and getting back into that, and look forward to sharing more of that with you in the future. With that, I think I'm going to transition over to the quilting work that I have been doing. So in the last few weeks, I have taken a class to learn how to sew curves in quilts. I have made 2 quilts before. I would consider myself a fairly basic quilter. But I have only ever stitched straight lines in my quilting. And so I had a family member who was going to take this class and asked if I wanted to join along. And I said, sure, of course. And so it was just a really good opportunity to learn how to sew curves, which can be a little bit intimidating. Absolutely. So the pattern that we stitched, you can see just a small portion of it, is this double time quilt, and it's from the book Handmade Getaway. But you can also buy this as an individual pattern from the Workroom, which is a craft shop up in the Toronto area. And one of the authors of this book is actually the designer. They're the designer. All of my pieces just fell on the ground. So that gives you a little more look at the pattern. And this is a variation on, I am told, the Drunkard's Path style of quilt, in which you cut out a lot of pieces. I apparently have all kinds of stuff in this book. And you sew circles, semicircles, kind of interlocking circles, and they are kind of throughout that pattern, or throughout that quilt top. And it's a really good opportunity to show off different fabrics and different things. So what I like about this quilt is it's the same block over and over again. So you really do get a good opportunity to practice sewing those curves. What I am going to do is I'm going to insert a short video that I filmed to actually show you the quilt top and a little bit of information about it. And then I will come back and I will show you just a portion of it and talk a little bit more about that. So enjoy the video. Here is my completed quilt top for my double time quilt. This view really lets you see the full scale and scope of the design. And starting here in the center, you can see that there are a couple of really dark pieces and that the circles ripple out as you go out to the edges of the quilt. And then also down here in the left corner, you'll notice that there are a lot of very dark fabrics clustered here on this corner. And so if you actually sort of trace it through, it gets a little bit bigger and bigger as you get out to the edges of this lower quadrant. And then in the center, you're kind of constricted where you see that darker circle there. And then you actually see those same darker colors expanding out to the upper side of the quilt. And then on the opposite angles, you have light fabrics going the opposite direction. And so what I have done is I have the reverse image of each of the pieces in each of the corners moving in so that the fabrics are getting closer and closer together as you reach the center. So I thought that was just a really fun way to distribute the fabrics over the course of the quilt top, and so that you also not only get the ripple effect of the overall image, but that constriction and contraction of the colors and the fabrics as you're going throughout the course of over the top of the quilt. So there we go, my double time quilt. All right, so I had a lot of fun with this quilt, and in part because I deliberately chose to make this a scrappy quilt. I have a whole lot of fabrics that I've picked up as fat quarters and small cuts of things, and so this was just a really good opportunity to show off some of those pieces. But I also decided that even though I kind of went with a color scheme in terms of teals and pinks and blue, there was just a really good opportunity to show off little elements of those fabrics. And so I just decided I had 80 different fabrics in this quilt top in the end, but I think even though they, in some ways, I don't know, maybe compete with each other, I think it's fun to actually focus on each of the individual blocks as you're going through. And what I did try to do was have a relatively lower volume fabric tied in with one of the ones that was a much bolder fabric, so that you at least didn't have lots of stuff competing all together. And I think that I did a pretty good job of that. And the way that you cut out the fabric, it means that you wind up with 2 blocks of the same pairing of fabrics if you want to. And so they're essentially mirror images of each other. You have one that is a concave and one that is a convex piece of each of your fabrics. And even though what we're seeing right now shows most of these fabrics all facing right side up, many of them are obviously one directional. And so there are some that are sideways or sort of upside down as you go throughout the quilt. But I decided this is going to be a throw quilt. It's not going to be something that's laid out on, a bed with a specific direction. And so if you're just snuggling under a quilt under the, on your couch, who knows how you're going to pull it up? You're not necessarily going to be looking at the top of the quilt. And so I decided I didn't need to be overly precious about that. But I think it's just really fun to get to show off, like I said, so many different things. And as I showed you in the other video, I did just kind of focus on having some of those darker fabrics reflecting throughout the piece. And then here is our center block, which I really like. So I enjoyed it. It was a really good opportunity. I'm just covered in threads now. It was a really good opportunity to practice curves. If you are a quilter or you're thinking about it, but you haven't done curves before or you want to practice, I do recommend this pattern because the curves are relatively large and you just repeat that block. So it's a really good opportunity to practice. And at this point, what I need to do is I need to square up my quilt. I need to cut all of my threads and kind of do the grooming part of it. And then I am going to take it to a long arm quilter. When I did my last quilt, the one in which I kind of learned how to actually do quilting properly rather than just kind of winging it as I went along, I learned that even though I enjoy the piecing, which is what is called when you're putting together the quilt top, I enjoy the piecing, I don't mind the cutting, but the actual quilting in which you've put all of the layers together and are sewing them together is frustrating on my domestic machine, which you can make it work, but it's not comfortable, it's not fun. And that I just didn't enjoy the quilting process. And so I decided that if I ever made another quilt again, I would send it out to a long armor. So that is something that I will be doing at some point in the future. And then one of the things that I also did in order to make the assembly easier for myself is I had taken a picture of it so that I could do a black and white version of it and I could check the layout, check the contrast. But what I thought would be helpful is I also just printed out a copy of that and I labeled all of my pieces. I did have them labeled with stickers on the actual pieces as well, but this helped me remember and confirm that I was putting things in the right place. And it also helped me because of the way that the only place in which there are curved seams that match up are in these 2 cross sections. And so I did those first to make sure that I could get the curved seams to match up as well. And so I wound up sort of I did the center block and then I did the 4 kind of radiating wings. And then I sewed the 4 quadrants together. And so I wound up kind of assembling the quilt in a slightly odd way. But it also meant that in the end, the only 2 long seams I had to put together were right here where I put essentially the top and the bottom together. So it was just really helpful for me to confirm everything was going in the right place. I had everything facing the right direction, all of that. So definitely something I will keep in mind for any future quilts. And I will say, I do have a couple of other quilts that I have started after having taken the class the last time to learn how to do quilting properly. and getting over the like, nope, not going to do this again. It was like, yeah, I could do a couple of quilts. I started a couple, and they haven't gotten much further than cutting the pieces out. And as I was going through this process, I was thinking, I don't know if I don't think quilting is going to become my primary hobby. I enjoy it occasionally, but I enjoy the things that I enjoy about piecing and whatnot, I can do by making placemats and project bags and other smaller things. And so I don't have to put together an entire quilt top, send it out to a long armor, do all of those things. And so I was thinking about the quilts that I have already partially prepped, and a couple of them I have some sort of sentimental attachment to them. It's why I started them to begin with. But I also have one that I started, and honestly, I started it just because I liked the fabric. I don't really feel like this has to be a quilt in my life. I just like the fabric. And so I think I'm going to back away from making that a quilt and just turn it into some smaller projects. This is a free pattern that is online. It was, at least when I did this a number of years ago. I will link to it if it's still available. But this is called the Proof Positive Quilt, and it was originally going to be a baby quilt size. And you'll notice that I made all kinds of notes to myself about what my pieces needed to be and how I was going to lay them out. And I think it'll be fun to do. Very easy because it's just straight line quilting. But again, the whole point of it was to use up a particular fabric that I really liked. And that was this series of fabrics from the Rifle Paper Company about London, kind of little scenes from London. And I had bought a jelly roll because I think the pattern calls for 2.5-inch strips anyway. And I liked it. I bought it because there were just so many little fun things. So you've got Tower Bridge, and you've got the London buses, and you've got little dogs and things. And then there are some that are sheep on the hillside. Let's see. Like there, which I thought was really cute. And we've got some beef eaters who are taking corgis for walks. And so just a really fun fabric line. I bought it. I still really love this fabric line, but I thought, again, it doesn't have to be a quilt top. And so what I am planning to do, since I've already done all of the cutting, I've got things ready to go, I am just going to figure out some other things that I can make from this assembled top. And so I definitely can make myself a retreat mat. That will take up a portion of it. And then I could either do a project bag or another quilted tote bag, some other things. So smaller things that will use up that fabric, allow me to show off the kind of plus sign design, but not necessarily have to actually be the full assembly of a quilt top. So that I think is going to be my next quilting project, because that I could definitely do at home and enjoy. So it was nice to learn how to sew curves, and it was nice to be reminded that, you know, there are things about quilting that I like, but I don't necessarily have to be making quilt tops in order to be doing that. All right. That, I think, is all of the crafty content I have for you today. The last thing that I have to chat about is just a little bit of book talk. And it's actually not about the content of any of the books that I have read this year. I am going to talk about the thing that we're not supposed to do, but we all do anyway, which is judging a book by its cover. And one of the projects that I undertook for myself this year is I wanted to read more classic books. I think I talked about this in a prior video. There were a lot of classics that I have read. There's a lot that I haven't read. And I wanted to focus on some of those books, feeling like I was filling in some of those gaps in my own knowledge of literature. But I also knew that there were some classics that, you know, are always on the like top 100 classics or all of those things that I really am not interested in. And so I was picking out my own list of books that I wanted to read. And I came up with kind of a fun little way to do it. I found an independent bookstore, and what I did is I set up myself a wish list, and I put all of the books that I actually do want to read on that wish list, and then every month the bookstore sends me one of the books from that list. It's still a surprise, so I don't know which book is coming every month, but I do know that it is a book that I consciously have decided that I want to read, which is a little bit different than some of the just mystery boxes or things like that that you might get. And what I also decided in order to kind of encourage myself to do this is I am deliberately choosing like editions of the books that I really like. So in addition to the content, it's a book that I like and want to have on my shelf, and it gives me pleasure as I am reading it because I'm getting to pick up this edition that is visually appealing or physically interesting in some way and that I enjoy. So I just thought I would just show off a couple of those covers for you. Because it's been something I have been enjoying. So the most recent one that I have read is Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson. I had never read Treasure Island. And this is a kind of a small hardcover. And this one had not been on my radar. I happened to come across this one on at a Barnes and Noble, and it was part of a 3-pack set by Chronicle Books, and they were publishing, I think it was Books for Seafarers or something like this. And so it's Treasure Island, it's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and then there was one from H.G. Wells that I had never heard of. And so it was these 3 books, all with similar covers, but that have imagery that is distinctive to that particular title, and I really enjoyed them. They were not particularly expensive. I think it was $35 for all 3, which for a well-made hardcover I think is very good. But they're very kind of thoughtfully put together. They're well made, they're hardcovers, and so I enjoyed it. And it's got little illustrations throughout, and I like that they're fairly small, so they fit in my hand well. Even 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, which is a much larger book, is still going to be, I think, very comfortable to read. So that one was just kind of one that I stumbled across, and I thought that that was fun. The next one, this was one of the mystery books that I received from my bookstore, was Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. And it was one I had started many years ago, hadn't finished, but I wanted to read again. And I really enjoy this edition of books. These are the Everyman's Library series, and they've published quite a lot of different books. I will say I'm not necessarily like keen on the dust jacket of some of these books. It's not always the art that I like, but I really enjoy the way that the books are put together. And if you take the dust jacket off, you see this beautiful cloth bound cover with this very classic spine on it. And they have your cloth bookmark in there as well. And Everyman's edition is this very well made cloth bound hardcover. They're a little more on the expensive side, I will say that, but they are very well made. And in addition to the book, there is always an introduction by someone who is an expert or knowledgeable in that area. And then there's also a timeline that talks about events that were happening both in the author's life, but also in the world. And they're in a parallel, so you can actually see what are the things that are potentially impacting that author or the world around them as they are writing and living through their life. So, and then depending on kind of what series of books, whether it's a more modern book, a classic book, different things, you get a different color of dust jacket. So this is, for example, what I have collected all of my Jane Austen books in, because I wanted a really nice edition of my Jane Austen books. And so I did get, over time, I kind of bought myself each of the Everyman's editions for that. So that is a series that I enjoy. And then I also have read The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Anne Bronte. This is one of the Penguin Classics series. These have become, this style of book has become very popular and much sort of copied. There are people who are actually recovering current modern books with this style of book. People are learning how to bookbind again in order to recreate this style of cover. And it has kind of this screen printing, is that what it's called? And then is a cloth, another cloth book with a cloth bookmark. And so I would say not quite the quality of the Everyman's edition, but still very nice. And so I enjoyed that one. And then there are many different editions of the Tenant of Wildfell Hall. This is the one that I liked the most. And so this is why I chose it. I'm definitely being kind of picky in what I am choosing. So it has been it's been fun just to actually go through and look at the many, many editions. You can see my sticker that is still there. As I am choosing them, because in some cases you can get some really nice editions, and then you can also get some really ugly. Obviously somebody just grabbed an image off of, you know, the web and made a book out of it because they're in the public domain. So that was Tenant of Wildfell Hall. And then the last one, which is one of the early books I read, was this copy of Walden that was actually illustrated. I have read Walden before, but it had been a number of years. And when I saw this edition, I thought, this is the perfect excuse to reread Walden. And so it's kind of very nicely put together with pull-out quotes. There are kind of woodcut images throughout. There is paintings that are reproduced, lots of different things to kind of give you a feel for the book and the content and the era of what was happening as Thoreau was writing his book. So this one I also really enjoyed simply as a beautiful addition that enhanced the reading process for me. So I'm, you know, a couple months into this experiment. I have been enjoying it. It's lovely to get that surprise book every month. And it does kind of give you that a little bit of extra something as you're reading it in addition to the content. So fun things. All right. That is our video for the day. Again, thank you so much for coming back and joining me, or joining me for the very first time. And I will see you in a future video. Bye, everybody.